Hey folks, have you ever played a game where enemies remember you after you respawn? A game where enemies will hunt you down because you bested them in combat? A game where you can influence the army of your enemy and control it from the shadows? If you haven't, then you haven't played Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor, and I'm gonna tell you why you should. There is nowhere else I can start except with the Nemesis system. This is the mechanic that makes the game what it is and allows you to create your own personal story every time you play. You'll encounter randomized Uruk captains that have various strengths and weaknesses to the various ways that you can attack them. You can gain knowledge of this by interrogating Uruks and find out the strengths and weaknesses of the captains so that when you fight them, you can take advantage of their weaknesses and beware of their strengths. Some Uruks might be weak to stealth, which means you can one-shot them with a stealth attack, while others who are much stronger will be immune to a large part of your arsenal, and you'll have to come up with creative ways to take them down. These Uruk captains will all have individual names and personalities that cause them to make lasting impressions on you. There's still fodder enemies, of course, to fill out the fights, but for the most part, they're just a tool for you to charge up your abilities to deal damage to the captains. That being said, they still have the potential to take you down, and when they do, due to the system, they're actually able to rise up in the hierarchy and become captains themselves. The system really shines upon your successes or failures to kill your targets. If you succeed, the Uruk has the potential to return, albeit with some new metal parts covering their no doubt gruesome injuries, and they'll hunt you down and seek revenge for your past actions. Similarly, if you die to your target, then the Uruk will rise the ranks as I mentioned, and they'll gain strength and sometimes followers. And if you return to finish the job, then they'll gloat to you about their past victory over you and vow to do it again. I had several moments when replaying the game where I would come up against an orc and they would take me down, only for me to immediately go back and try to get revenge. And sometimes this would take multiple attempts, and every time I would go back, they would gloat and say how they're so much better than me or whatever. And it just really incentivizes you to keep going after them and to try and take them down. And it makes it all the more satisfying when you finally do. In the second half of the game, you gain the ability to brand Uruks. This essentially mind controls them so that they will fight for you and take orders from you. You can use this to increase the strength of the Uruks while weakening the war chiefs, which will lead to the war chief making your branded orc their new bodyguard, which opens up opportunities for that bodyguard to betray them right as you're about to attack the war chief and give you an advantage in the combat scenario. The branding comes much later than I remembered when I first played the game, but once you do unlock it, the game starts to feel whole as you have access to the full potential of the Nemesis system. While the Nemesis system definitely takes front and center stage in this game, there is a story to follow along as well. It's kind of a classic Lord of the Rings story where you play as a ranger of the Black Gate of Gondor, and when the Black Gate is attacked by Sauron's followers, your family is killed in a blood ritual performed by the Black Hand, who serves as the main antagonist of the game. The ritual causes a wraith to become connected to us, who turns out to be Celebrimbor, who is the smith who worked with Sauron to create the rings. Celebrimbor tells us that we are,
You are banished from death.
and I think that's such a sick line. The main story will focus on you meeting characters that will point you in the direction of various artifacts that will uncover who the Wraith is, and eventually lead you to hunt down the three servants of Sauron that killed your family. Most of the game's missions are great, but there's some like a mission where you have to poison Grog. It's just pretty boring. All you do is follow a character around, gather some herbs, and then throw it in some grog. It's a very boring mission that unlocks a mechanic that I literally didn't use for the entire game outside of this one mission. Gollum does show up in this game for a few missions. It's explained that he's here due to Celebrimbor's connection to the One Ring. He serves his purpose well enough, but I felt that his addition came a little bit too soon, although, it's always nice to see more Gollum that isn't that terrible game that came out a little while ago. The game feels like playing earlier Assassin's Creed titles, mixed with some Lord of the Ring elements and Batman Arkham Asylum combat. You have the counter button style combat and then the free running and stealth elements as well. You also have the ability to use the Wraith powers to help you battle the Uruks. I spent a good amount of time when I first started the game just battling hordes of Uruk, just finding it quite a cathartic experience. It's just you get into kind of a meditative state where you're just pressing the Y button and killing some orcs, and it's pretty relaxing actually. But as you grow in power, you gain access to more combat techniques that allow you to deal with various types of Uruk that you face, which consists of various classes like archers, berserkers, hunters, defenders, and basic warriors. You have to vault over the shield users, stun berserkers, and stop them from countering your attacks while dodging all the ranged attackers. The ranged attackers are actually the hardest enemies in the game, not because they're particularly difficult to kill, but because they'll kind of just hide in high places and on the outskirts of fights and just throw projectiles your way. And the projectiles aren't the easiest things to see in these hectic fights. So they end up just doing quite a bit of damage to you without you realizing. And oftentimes the reason that I went down in fights was because of the ranged enemies. The immunities that the captains can have kept the fights quite interesting, though, as if you don't have the intel on a captain, they might sometimes randomly join in on a fight halfway through, and you'll have to kind of learn what they're resistant to and how you can actually take them down on the fly. Finishers were, in my opinion, the best part of combat, as you use executions and this AoE Wraith Flash to deal massive single target or multi-target damage respectively. To use them, you have to charge up your hit counter, which means getting hits without getting hit yourself, and this allows you to use these powerful attacks. It makes for a simple and satisfying loop where you attack orcs to build up hits and then execute them, and it only gets easier the stronger that you get. The sound design and animations on the finishers are very well done, and it has so much impact when you eventually chop the head off of a captain. Upgrading abilities was satisfying, but there's a currency called Miriam, which is used to upgrade your weapons and physical resources like your health, the amount of slow time focus that you have, and the amount of arrows that you can use before you run out. I found it pretty uninteresting to gather this currency because the main way to get it was through side content and gathering collectibles and challenge missions. And these types of things are usually not something I'm interested in games, so I pretty much ignored them. Boss fights in the base game are kind of weird, actually. There's one where it's like a stealth mission, which I don't think I've ever seen in a game before, where the boss fight is a stealth mission. And the others were relatively forgettable. There's one where you fight a character that's basically just a bigger orc. Apparently, he used to be a human, I was reading in the lore, but he definitely looks like an orc now. But it's pretty forgettable. He's basically just a larger enemy that had a reskinned version of one of our attacks. And similar to Dying Light, this game commits the cardinal sin of having the final fight be a quick time event, which I was a bit disappointed by, but it was a pretty cool looking fight regardless. I'll briefly talk about the DLC here as well. The Hunt DLC was actually much more enjoyable than I was expecting it to be, because it kind of focuses on Torvin and Talion's relationship and them working together. I assumed I wouldn't really enjoy it very much because in the base game, Talion's attempts to make a bunch of stupid short jokes to Torvin, I didn't really enjoy that, and unfortunately, it continues here in the DLC. But that being said, the Beastmaster War Chiefs added some really fun and unique fights that I'd never played before. I didn't have the DLC when I last played this game. So it was actually a whole new experience for me, and I actually really, really enjoyed it. The Graug and Ghoul War Chiefs in particular were really good fights, and they used the new mechanics that came with the DLC really well. One of the Beastmaster war chiefs happened to be called Shagfak, and when they call out his name, it kind of sounded like Shagfuck, and that gave me a good laugh. The addition of the new type of Karagor, its name is escaping me at the minute, but it was okay. You know, it was basically just a stealth version of the same enemy, and I didn't really use Karagors much anyway over the course of the game, but you know, it was pretty cool. The spitting Graug was actually pretty fun to use, even though for some reason it damages itself whenever it uses its spit attack, which I thought was kind of odd. At least it was enjoyable. The Celebrimbor DLC was quite fun as well, getting to play through his experience of being in control of the One Ring and using it against Sauron was pretty great and a really awesome idea for a DLC. It made the Lord of the Rings fan in me very happy, even though Celebrimbor himself is significantly weaker than Talion. When you're not abusing the One Ring power, that is, because the power that you get in this DLC is basically God mode. It lets you just use as many finishers as you want, as many times as you can within the given time limit. The boss fight versus Sauron was pretty great. He was a very intimidating presence. He was really tall. And he had this huge mace that he swung about everywhere and powerful like dark magic attacks, and he could revive any of the orc captains that you killed. And even during the fight, he had moments where he broke your branding of them and took control back. The fight versus him was kind of awkward though, because you can't really damage him unless you use an execution move on him, which meant that most of the time you were just fighting the Uruks around him and trying to build up the power of the One Ring, and then you can kind of spam your executions on him. But even still, dealing with his presence and his attacks while trying to fight the orcs made for a really fun and unique boss fight, and was definitely the best boss fight in the game. If you enjoyed the base game, then the DLC is definitely more of the same. You're essentially just going after war chiefs again, but with some new additions of the war chiefs being much more unique, and it definitely felt that they added a lot more different kinds of Uruk in the DLC. There was one that I saw that had saliva running out of its mouth and things like that. So there's definitely some unique ones that you can find in there if you explore all the different kinds of Uruk. I really enjoyed returning to Shadow of Mordor. It's been absolutely years since I played it, so it was a very nostalgic experience, and getting the opportunity to mess around with the Nemesis system again is always a welcome one. If you guys have ever played this game yourselves, or if I've inspired you to play it, I'd love for you to share your memories or experiences down below in the comments of fighting your Uruk Nemesis, and if you had any funny interactions with them, as I'm sure you will have. If you like this video, then please watch another of mine. Consider liking, subscribing, and thanks for watching.